welcome to another episode of Monday Tsene with Pretoria Psychologists. I am Stephanie Swarts, and I'm just going to be adding to the segment of anxiety. So, let's start off with a little bit of a background to anxiety. So, as we know, anxiety is both a physiological and psychological response to a fear or a stressor. So, it's a physiological manifestation of the body in response to the fear. So let's start off by defining two different fears. So you generally get two different fears. You get your adaptive fear and you get your maladaptive fear. So when it comes to adaptive fears are mostly realistic. These adaptive fears surpass once the threat has disappeared, and it leads to appropriate adaptable behaviors. With maladaptive fears, so maladaptive means interferes with your day-to-day functioning. So your ability to maybe brush your teeth or your ability to maybe cook or something like that. So maladaptive fears are usually out of proportion. So it's usually a fear that most people wouldn't find threatening, and this fear would be prolonged and sustained long after the threat has disappeared. A person that engages in maladaptive fears, or when a maladaptive fear occurs, it's usually in a response to a threat that might not be perceived as a threat to other people. As humans, our bodies tend to mobilize threats or stresses in order to handle it. How we do this is through a fight or flight response. So what happens during a fight or flight response biologically is that there are two systems controlled by the hippocampus in the brain that gets activated. So these systems consist of the autonomic nervous system, specifically with the sympathetic division of the system, and then with the adrenal system. So what happens in the brain as well during the fight or flight response, there's either an overproduction of cortisol in the brain or an underproduced level of cortisol in the brain, causing an individual to flee. Let's go back to anxiety now. Anxiety symptoms can be constituted or divided into four main domains. So firstly, your somatic symptoms, then your emotional symptoms, your cognitive symptoms, and your behavioral symptoms. So your somatic symptoms would be those physical symptoms, such as sweating, experiencing a dry mouth, heart palpitations, changes in your breathing, maybe the need to go to the bathroom on and off more often than not, muscle tension, especially tightness around the chest area. With emotional symptoms, those are basically experiencing a sense of dread, terror, restlessness, or hypervigilance, and irritability. With cognitive symptoms, those usually involve or encapsulate the anticipation of harm, exaggeration of anger, even catastrophizing, difficulties with concentration, worrying or ruminating about a thought, or fear or perceived stressor, fear of losing control, fear of dying, or a sense of losing touch with reality. With behavioral symptomology, it's behaving as though you feel like you need to escape. Also avoidance and aggression, or even just freezing. So anxiety can be caused or attributed to various instances and in various settings, mainly social settings, or even due to separation, even public speaking, experiencing a traumatic incident. It could also be a learned behavior or even a perceived threat. So again, just to go back to the biological factors that leak into or define anxiety. So people who experience anxiety have a heightened sense of activity in the sympathetic nervous system, as I mentioned before. This also results in a greater reactivity in the amygdala of the brain, of the limbic system part of the brain. In addition, there's also an overproduction of GABA in the brain, in the neurotransmitter system of the brain. So this prevents like neurons from firing to one another and sending messages to one another. So it decreases your ability to soothe. If an individual experiences an over excessive amount of anxiety or chronic abnormal activity rather, this would lead to or may manifest in chronic symptoms of anxiety. What could also be another biological factor is genetics. As we know that with the changes that COVID-19 has brought about onto society and how we've adapted into a society that has to readjust to uncertainty, that has led us to adapting new skills and new coping mechanisms to live. Has that been an easy process? No. Thus, there's been a lot of research recently done that has postulated that there's been an increase in anxiety amongst individuals within society. COVID itself, in addition, has prolonged the state of stress and kind of, in a way, increased hypervigilance, because as we know it, stats are increasing on a daily basis, and based on what we get informed on social media, via television broadcasts and so on, that may increase our sense of fear and sense of hypochondria towards the coronavirus itself, leading to, again, an overproduction of cortisol within the brain, because it's anxiety that we're talking about here again, experiencing an extreme stressor, a pandemic that nobody has been through before, that nobody has experienced before, that everybody has to learn how to adapt to. However, the body can learn new ways and new coping mechanisms of so I find new ways of adapting to the symptoms of anxiety. So a general overarching home treatment for anxiety would be, firstly, step 1, to contact your preferred practitioner or healthcare service provider, because there they would be able to tell you your duration and severity of anxiety that you experience and in which context your symptoms are associated with, as I was talking about. Then step 2, perhaps from there onwards, or whether you learn about anxiety further, you can learn adaptable or develop skills to self-soothe. There's a lot of literature posted and literature published on the very basic symptoms of anxiety and how to cope with those symptoms as well. But a practitioner would be the best advisor to assist you on that journey. Step 3, learning about day-to-day hacks on how to manage your symptoms. So that again can be done with a practitioner or healthcare service provider, or As we see on Instagram, on Twitter, a lot of practitioners actually post recommendations. So that would be very useful to use just to improve your level of well-being when you are dealing with symptoms of anxiety. Thank you so much for your time and listening. I'm Stephanie Swarts. Peace out.